ask the aliens any questions. And I really believe it's possible that it's so, because they knew about the lump behind my father's ear and, that sort of thing. And I said, great, let's do an experiment. Ask these ladies to ask the aliens what the problem is with Yellowstone. Now, this is an esoteric bit of information that comes to me from a bizarre and wonderful friend of mine who's a naturalist and a physicist and a very interesting fellow. And they said, okay, what's the problem with Yellowstone? And I said, oh, no. Just in case there's some telepathic pickup, let's make it a little harder. I'll tell you afterwards. So they came back, and the fellow in Saskatchewan said a lady out in British Columbia that he's working with, he's rather well known as a contactee as opposed to an abductee, a UFO person contactee, said the problem with Yellowstone is that there are underground caverns where secret experiments are being run by the U.S. government, and the experiments aren't going very well, which is not likely to be untrue if those experiments are going on, because the underground caverns are superheated to about 2,000 degrees by the steam, the superheated geothermal steam that's there. So the experiments probably melted. Which does tend to, make them not go well. The lady in Springfield, Missouri wrote lengthy paragraphs, pages about the fact that the forest fire in Yellowstone, which had occurred shortly before, had destroyed so many trees that the oxygen content of the planet was now depleted and life was, which is of course nonsense statistically. Now, the interesting and the problem with Yellowstone is that there's a crustal rise, there's a bubble of magma coming up. And at the outrageous rate of about a half-inch a year, this crust, which is already rather thin, it's about 3 miles thick, is rising, and if it breaks through, the magma release will be so tremendous that all life on the planet will be exterminated, because the amount of debris flung up into the air will block out 99 or 98% of the light that reaches the surface of the planet. We're in deep soup.
But would you believe that? What about that volcano in the East Indies that really blacked out? Yeah,
Krakatoa had tremendous impact on the Earth's
But it didn't fly. But it didn't.
No, but we're not talking about a magma release of anywhere near the same magnitude. We're talking about orders of magnitude smaller. So
wait a minute, Yellowstone would be smaller than Krakatoa?
Yellowstone would be significantly larger, many orders of
magnitude than Krakatoa.
And it happens, it's thought that it goes in about a 600,000 year cycle, and it happened about 600,000 years ago, say the geologists who are interested in this sort of thing. So give or take 10,000 years, that is the problem with Yellowstone. Now the physician in Saskatchewan said, well, the social worker said, gee, I wonder why she, how that was created and what empowers her or leads her to feel that she's in contact with the aliens. Obviously it was wrong. The guy in Saskatchewan, the physician, said, why would the aliens lie? Which is very interesting. But, but there are lots and lots of people who, for one reason or another, are not Trumpers because they have a very different response. Some of these people show clear evidence, to my assessment, of being in chronic PTSD without recognizing the trauma. But anyhow, so the scenario goes onward.
What are the signs?
Well, people wear pointy rocks around their neck.
Oh, really? There you go. Oh, God, I knew it. I knew it was serious.
Just to finish the scenario very quickly, the people float down, they're taken to an examination chamber, which could be as small as just big enough for one metal table or hard surface, narrow table on which they lie, or could have as many as 100 or 150 or 200 tables. People report different size craft. Craft typically are described as being larger on the inside than on the outside, but that's not invariant. And that bothers people with a scientific education. It bothers them a lot. My husband keeps saying, what do they mean by that? Do they mean by that? I don't know what they mean by that. So then after probing and poking and some messing around, which tends to involve some reproductive business and some intense staring into the eyes of the individual by the little gray guys, and some creation of images within the mind, or perhaps in front of the visual, in the visual field of the individual, and some playing around in that way. That's over after some point, and sometimes it's painful, sometimes it's not. Often is reported to involve harvesting of ova from women and harvesting of sperm from men, or boys and girls as well.
And how
People
do
who
they do it in what way is that done?
Well,
Like the joke of the Medicaid mill, or?
like the joke of the Medicaid mill. Tell me the joke.
The gathering of sperm in the expensive clinic is done by a gorgeous female,
Right.
And the client really has a great time.
Right.
And in the Medicaid mill, it's a dirty room, and they're giving out a Hustler magazine or worn out the copy of Hustler or Playboy, right? And they have to do it themselves.
Right. Right. No, it's not like the Medicaid bill, but it's interesting. Lots of men report they're being mounted by a female whom they typically initially will describe as human, and then when you say what color hair, what were her eyes like, and so on, those features kind of peel away, and what you get is a hairless, light bulb shaped head, big-eyed creature, which has absolutely no erotic component for anybody that I've ever.
This is a reversal almost of Rosemary's Baby when
Maybe some
when she says, she opens her eyes and she says, "This isn't the dream, this is real." And the devil's mounting her. Oh God.
Well,
That's the famous succubus and incubus.
Yes, of course.
Often, however, even that falls away. And what it is an instrumentation procedure with arousal produced against the intent of the individual, of the man, saying, no, 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 but yes, yes, yes. And ejaculation without particular pleasure. And I have known of one case of a physician who became addicted to the experience and spent his life, he had 2 lives. This is a rather interesting clinical situation. He had one life in which he was a respected member of the community and had a baby, 2 babies actually, and a wife, and a lovely house, and that sort of thing. And then the other part, is it all right that I sat down over here instead
Sure,
of that?
no problem.
The other part of his life that really caused him enormous agony was that without knowing what it was, he spent incredible amounts of time and energy and money looking for it. If he heard about some bizarre sexual experience in Bangkok, he would be on the plane the next morning, and he structured his practice so that he could leave instantly without notice, and he was gone. He was on the way to Bangkok to try to find it, and he was addicted sexually to an experience that he couldn't identify.
Was he a good record keeper?
Yes. Yes. He knew what it was that he was experiencing, and he knew what wasn't it. And frankly, I've never heard a more full account of activities that couldn't be it. I was astonished. I'm not easily shocked, but I was literally open-mouthed by the time he got through telling me what it wasn't. Because I've never heard of some of the things that it wasn't. I never thought of some of the things that it wasn't.
And this wasn't his imagination either.
No, this really was not. And when we did a regressive hypnosis, it was a terribly, terribly poignant session. And he was crying, and I was crying too because it was so moving. He retrieved memories for the first time, being a very young child, and having stimulation applied to the penis with this instrumentation. And after ejaculation, and he was much too young to have been able to ejaculate in an ordinary situation, after ejaculation, the stimulation continued. and continued and continued. And first it was painful, and then it became something that was not pain and was not pleasure. And whenever he was subjected to this experience, that same procedure was repeated. This is awfully atypical. I haven't heard this in any other situation. So that there would be stimulation to ejaculation. Very often there's ejaculation without any stimulation at all. There's simply tumescence and then ejaculation, and no sensation of pleasure. But this was a different protocol, apparently. So there'd be stimulation, ejaculation, continued stimulation to pain, and then stimulation beyond the pain to a state that was outside pain and pleasure, but certainly addicting. And that's what he was looking for, and had no conscious memory of what it was that was being sought. After we did the hypnosis, he never made another high-speed secret trip again. He didn't need to do that. In other words, we had unearthed whatever it was, and he now had tools with which to deal with it at a conscious level. And that's fairly typical of what happens in the process of unearthing whatever these things are, memories or whatever, because the clinical resolution is often phenomenal of phobias, of anxiety states, of bizarre behaviors, of neuroses, of the belief of having been molested by parents or by others who deny that that ever happened. And in fact, the terrestrial abuse that's remembered seems to serve as a screen memory for this other kind of abuse. Now, the debunkers frequently say, well, of course, it's this extraterrestrial stuff is just a screen memory, not dealing with why it's a coherent rather than a diversified screen memory. But in fact, clinically, what you see is that it's the terrestrial abuse that acts as a screen memory. And once that's lifted and pierced and you get to the core, then you get remission of symptoms. So that's rather interesting. So
Are they all similar, the descriptions
of the
of
abuse,
extraterrestrial abuse?
very similar. They're not all similar. There are a few outliers. And in Great Britain, the aliens tend to be different. Maybe the world's been split up and the taller, lighter-colored ones got the British Isles. But, and that's weird. That's weird.
The blondes.
The blondes, the Nordics. But in the main, most of the report, of course, the data collection has been so poor, and the numbers of good, scrupulous, methodologically concerned people working in this field has been to underestimate the situation small up until very recently. Few people have been systematic. We need a worldwide database to see what we're looking at. Well, so off the table, poking, prodding, mind scanning, over with. Not a pleasant procedure for most people, even though there's some indication that the limbic system and the reticular activating system are messed around with in order to produce some kind of affiliation. And that's reported in consistent ways by folks who have absolutely no knowledge of the neurological architecture of what they're looking at.
Are you in touch with, or have you heard of the work that Persinger up in
Yes.
Canada has been
Yes.
doing
Yeah.
with the use of the electromagnetic
Yes.
instrumentation to, I think it's the limbic system to get
Temporal
the
lobe.
same kind of
He does a lot of
result.
temporal lobe stimulation.
Temporal lobe.
Rima, are you saying that what these people report is that there's some way of going directly to the limbic system or the reticular?
It sounds as if, the
without
reports sound
going
as if
through-
that's what's happening, yeah.
Uh-huh.
We're not talking about a surgical procedure, we're talking
No,
about...
that's what I mean. You're talking
It's-
about some influence that goes there without...
If we assume that this is really happening, we don't know the locus of origin of these stories, but assume for a minute that this is veridical. What we're talking about is some kind of massive PK effect in which
Uh-huh.
the switches are thrown, the neurons are diddled with, the connections are played with in some way through access down the optic nerves to the optic chiasm back into the brain. And people will describe, if they're good observers, even if they know nothing about the stoichiometry and architecture of the nervous system, they will describe the following down of tracts that can be mapped on an atlas. I've done that. It's wild. That's really wild.
Rima, are you saying that this PK effect has a channel and that the channel goes through the eyes and the optic nerves?
That's what I'm saying.
And then how does it get to the reticular system from there?
Well, it follows tracts and radiations into, the optic gyri and back out again. There are a number of ways to get into the mammillary bodies. Have tracts radiating into the limbic system. You can get there. Oh, you can take the A train. You can get to Canarsie. You can do it any way you want. And then it's very interesting too that there are memory aberrations that are very much like Korsakov's, very much. And again, in the lateral mammillary, if you have which is right in the track of this process, if you have a lesion there, you'll get Korsakov-like syndromes. And in fact, they're indistinguishable clinically from Korsakov, so you get the seamless weld between the confabulated memory and the real memory, right? What color is this string? Blue. What color is this one? Green. Do you remember maybe we were out drinking together last night, Doc? No weld, no problem of moving from confabulation to reality and back again. Same thing with the screen memories that you get. And that's a whole different topic, but the neurological implications, or the implications for neurological diddling, are really fascinating. I'm familiar with Persinger, but he has to suggest to people using ELF and helmets and this and that, which, in another 50,000 years could be dispensed with technologically. But he has to suggest to people that now they're going to experience seeing a UFO person and so on and so on. There's also another experiment that was done by a professor of English named Alvin Lawson in California, who took supposedly real UFO experiencers and fake UFO experiencers and compared the results. Well, the transcripts of the sessions are nothing alike. He had to say, okay, now imagine there's a craft. Okay, now imagine you're going through the door. Okay, now imagine that you're on a table. And had to prompt, and then could get similar responses, and publish that as naive subjects who have not had the experience or don't claim the experience tell the same story. In fact, that's not what the data says. The data says that they were divergent. Their aliens were tall and short and hairy and thin and this and that and the other thing. But the, quote, real UFO experiencers had the same scenario to tell. Persinger, I've spoken with Persinger a number of times, and he hasn't yet been able to get anybody to have the story right without having to prompt them.
Rima, if you know somebody in Saskatchewan who can ask these people, has anybody ever asked them, what is the function of their coming to this planet?
Oh, people ask all the time, and people tell what the function is all the time.
And what is it?
Well, it depends on who you buy into. You can have any function you want. It's evil, wicked, terrible genetic manipulation and engineering. It's to save the planet and evolve human consciousness, and it's everything in between. There is no idea that, as far as I can see, anybody can come up with concerning UFOs that some group of people doesn't believe in as the truth concerning UFOs.
Well, let's say you think it might be a bit more veridical if you got it through this patient who knows the person in Saskatchewan. What would that person get?
Well,
or has that person been asked to ask?
People, lots of people say, I don't know, or I think it's this, or I think it's that. But have you been reading the literature on why they're here? It's a subset of the UFO literature. It's voluminous. It's enormous. Some of it's religious. There's a physician out in Kansas who has had his license lifted by the Board of Healing Arts because he believes in UFOs and because he believes that the Apostle Peter rides in one and has been talking to him and has selected him as one of the 4 saviors of humanity. And his mistake is that he's going around telling people there's nothing, he's a psychiatrist, naturally. And there's nothing been raised in terms of a question about his practice of psychiatry. It's indistinguishable from everybody else's in Kansas. But Scott's from Kansas. The point is, he's been very public about it, and says that it's to save humankind and has written and spoken and so on, and believes adamantly that he's right.
Rima,
But-
could I just ask you something real quick? I was wondering, because I deal with a lot of abductees, and I've noticed something interesting, and that's that each one of them, it seems that when the experience is happening, the creatures or entities, whatever you want to call them, they seem to know what makes that person tick. I don't know if that's an inner knowledge or it just comes from dealing with our species so long. But I've noticed that one person will be told, well, we're your space brothers, and if you'll come with us, we'll give you an immense amount of knowledge and new technology. Other ones will say, we're going to kill your entire family. We're going to kill your children if you don't come. I've, in thousands of cases, that's the scenario.
You've
From
dealt
one-
with thousands of cases?
Yeah, from one end to the other. I'm
Really?
from Long Island, that would explain it. But anyway, no, but I'm really wondering, what do you feel about that? Do you feel, I'll tell you, my feeling is that they'll say anything to accomplish their agenda, and I don't know what their agenda is. How do you feel about it?
Yeah, well, that plus the fact that there seems to be a confabulation factor that has to be dealt with very, very, very carefully. People take an absolutely incomprehensible experience and they try to weave meaning into it so that they can retain their grounding, and that seems reasonable to me. That's adaptive. So there's a mixture of confabulatory material, of fantasy, of needful state material, and then there's a mixture of whatever it is that they say. I think they can be peeled apart, but it requires attention to that issue to do it. How do you work with thousands? How have you gotten to work with thousands
I
of
did
abductees?
a brief lecture tour. I did 3 lectures in Pennsylvania in 4 days, and I found 54 abductees.
Fantastic.
So, it just tells you the level of stuff that's going on, because I do a lot of traveling. It's not all from Long Island, but I'd say a good quarter of them are from Long Island. There's a lot of
Are
people
you a
out there.
psychiatrist?
No, I'm just a UFO investigator, but I've been doing it for over 25 years, so in that time I've come across thousands of people.
Yeah.
And I have case files and all of them, stuff like that. But other question I want to ask you really disturbs me is one thing that's been very disturbing. I found that over the last 40 years, there's a whole group of young people that apparently have had abduction experiences during the time when they were very young. These are children typically, by the time they're 9 to 13 years old, they have an IQ anywhere from 140 to 150, normally. They're a very specific type of people. They either end up in science or math or bums on the street, to put it bluntly. They seem to have no purpose in life, and yet at the same time they feel this intense need to follow some intellectual career. Invariably, a lot of them, in fact, have worked on SDI and other programs for our government. But I guess my question is, how do you feel about the interruption, if you will, in our society by these creatures of these children? Because I see it still going on. Last year, just to let you know, I had spoken to 6 different groups of advanced young people. I call them advanced because they're in advanced special ed classes on Long Island. Now, the 6 programs were from one end of Long Island to the other. None of them knew of each other's existence in terms of their programming, and yet all of them in 1 year asked me to come and speak for them and told me independently that that particular year they had chosen UFOs as their course of study for the year. So, that's kind of odd, and
Well, there are 2,000 colleges and universities in this country teaching UFO courses this year.
Wow.
2,000. 10 years ago.
1,000.
10 years ago, there were maybe 3. So it's not just young people between the ages that you mentioned. But I will tell you, and I want Scott to have a chance to speak, and I want us all to have a chance to share. I gotta get through the scenario. I will tell you that in one of my other incarnations, I have done a great deal of work with I don't mean that literally, I mean one of the other things that I do. I've done a great deal of work with child prodigies, which was motivated and brought about by my dealing with my own son, who is now 16 and a half, and was so divergent from anything that I knew as a child psychiatrist that I started looking very early for expertise and wound up getting referrals because the people that I was looking for expertise from said, you've done more of this than we have, so they were sending families to me. And I got to be an expert in that way, and child prodigies. And we're talking about kids with IQs of 200 and above. You all understand that the numbers are pretty meaningless. It's a ballpark figure up there. We're not talking about the difference between 210 or 190, but you get an idea of the kind of child that we're dealing with. Well, there are far, far, far too many of these children. There are far too many statistically. There are far too many. Basically, you have a bimodal curve. You've got your standard curve, your bell-shaped curve, which my son at age 3.5 called a Gaussian banana on an asymptotic plate.
Oh my God.
He's very funny. And you have a bimodal hump out there, and it's a big bimodal hump out there at the high end. Now, when I was working with prodigies and wouldn't be caught dead talking about UFOs or even thinking about them, I thought, well, that's weird. It just indicates that the search has not been done, and that the prejudice against seeing these children has been a very real one. I'm not so sure that that's the explanation at this point. I really am not. We may be talking about God knows what. If these guys are real, and I make a very clear distinction for myself between what I believe or think and what I know. And I don't know for sure that these guys are real. I know for sure, to my own satisfaction, that UFOs are real. Because one of the things that happened for me is, as I got deeper and deeper into the abduction business, I said, UFO abduction, better learn about UFOs, and read the literature on UFOs, or at least what's available in English, and came to me, astonishing conclusion that the only fair-minded assessment of the data is that sometimes, under some conditions, in some way, some of these things are real nuts and bolts physical devices, whatever that means. So for me, I'm content to say UFOs are real in the way that things tend to be real in the world sometimes. Now, presumably somebody's driving them, unless they're all unmanned or unthinged probes. And presumably, unless it's a 9th grade science fair, and that is the only significance that it has, which could be, but it's a lot of energy to put into a 9th grade science fair. It could be a big high school. Somebody's doing something that's important enough to sling things around through the universe and consume energy and resources doing such a thing. There's so much consistent involvement with the genetic information and aberration and manipulation that it's not impossible to conceive of the fact that that might be one of the agendas, or might be the principal agenda. I know that there are far too many of these kids. They tend
Why
to...
are there too many?
Well, there should not be the numbers, just as there are too many abductees for it to be just a random something with no particular significance.
Is it harmful in some way?
No. There are too many according to the predictions and what we would expect, and the belief system of educators and psychiatrists and developmentalists.
What you mean is it's genetically one wouldn't expect that many.
Precisely.
So some other influence has come in. Is it?
What
Too
I
many
mean-
isn't a moral judgment or a
Not at all.
value judgment.
They're neat
It's just-
kids. They're terrific. I think the planet could use a great deal more of them. That's an order. I'm putting in
It's
my
just
order.
too many to be explained by what we're used
It's
to
an
use.
inexplicably high number. Let me
Yeah,
put
okay.
it that way. That's more useful. According to what we think we understand about statistics and distribution and the way human capacities fall out, this bimodal hump at the high end makes very little sense. There is a bimodal hump at the low end, but it's far smaller as far as we can tell. And that's another issue, I think. But these kids are awfully numerous.
Are these kids geographically situated that would be significant, or are they spread out, sort of randomly across the United States or all the countries of the world? And is the question of their intellectual, the phenomena of their intellect, such that the schools and the colleges and the educational system is really unable to deal with these youngsters, because I think that it's been very clear to me that someone who falls outside of the classroom norm, so to speak, is going to be down on detention every single day, you know, getting unsatisfactories. And yet this kid might be really more than the school can handle.
Oh yeah, these kids don't fare well in the school systems. Very rarely do they do well. There's a tremendous amount of human wastage. Whatever their ultimate genetic origin might be, we are wasting these children and condemning them to terribly unsuccessful lives, even if they do manage to survive academically. The wastage in terms of human potential and richness of social development and internal life is tremendous. That's a different story, and it's a tragic one.
What about the geographic?
Geographically, well, we have a data gathering problem. We don't, of course, if the kid is successfully squashed by the time they get to school, or, quote, normalized, to use that glorious word of early education, if the child is normalized, don't worry, said teachers to me. He will be normalized by the time he's 7. I said, what does that mean? They said, he'll stop being advanced. That's a goal. That's a goal.
Oh, good.
Don't teach him to read, they said, because it only makes it harder on the teacher.
Really?
Yes.
That's a political statement.
You got it.
That ever, you know, I was involved with the pilot project for the original Head Start program in New York. That was Marty Deutsch's notion of cultural deprivation, which got shot down early on, but it was shot down locally as a notion that had some validity. However, the Head Start programs were a necessary piece of the political spectrum, and it carried throughout the country, and it was bought just like the Peace Corps, which was another political project, and that was, the Peace Corps is the Head Start program for the grown-ups of the Third World. So you see there is some central political need that has to address itself to energy, and that's the best way I can put it. The energy that is spontaneous, that arises wherever it arises in the world. And if UFOs could be sort of put in the category of a form of energy of which they have no control over, they have to have a political reaction. There's a political reaction to it. At the present time, it's you know, it's made fun of, it's belittled, it's not accepted. And to cite the case of a friend of mine who was an abductee, he was in Vietnam, and he was a sergeant. He was leading patrol, company-sized patrol through some jungle, and suddenly a UFO appears above the group. Big light comes down, everybody gets illuminated with this light, and he wrote up a report and said that his men were there and this took place, and about a week later he was in the United States.
Was
They
he the
got
only
rid
one
of him.
abducted, Clarence? Or
No,
they
he
all-
wasn't abducted at that point.
Oh.
He was abducted later. But to just report the fact that he'd seen a UFO,
And nobody was abducted at the time.
no one was abducted, but plenty of UFOs were seen in Vietnam.
Yes, it's true. You know,
They got rid of him.
the paper that Scott and I co-authored at Treat 3 last March was Public Policy and Experienced Anomalous Trauma, which in some ways dealt with some of these issues. Scott, I have to tell you who's Scott. Why is this person with me? Scott is a...
I'm paying very close attention. Go ahead.
Let's take a vote. Let's create a reality here, the chair. Scott has been very much involved in the development of the treat process, about which we have not yet spoken at all yet. When Scott and I met, he was a retired Navy officer, and he'll doubtless tell you a little bit about that. He still is a retired Navy officer. And he was at that time special assistant to Senator Claiborne Pell, who's, and perhaps he'll talk a little bit about the function that he served there. And is now no longer in Pell's senatorial employ, but is the head of the Claiborne Pell Foundation for Human Potential since, March 15th, something like that, recently. Scott's been very much involved in the treat process and in the development of a milieu and an involvement situation in which it's possible to talk about policy issues, about science, about clinical issues, about physics, about sociology and behavioral science and governmental involvement and so on around experienced anomalous trauma, which includes but is not limited to UFOs. And Scott and I have gone together to Western Europe twice and to the Soviet Union once to extend the community of people who are talking together and doing research and sharing information and expertise into an international community. Why don't you want to say something about public policy and
What treat is?
this stuff?
Well,
Could we ask Scott to move over by you?
I told you, Scott, and you said, no, sit over here.
apparently has a very similar attitude towards making any statements, acknowledging anything about the reality of UFOs. They, in fact, say very little. And what they have said is I think, sometimes forgotten or misstated after the Project Blue Book was completed and they closed it down. They closed it down with a statement that most of the cases or most of the reports reported sightings could be explained as natural phenomena. And those that couldn't, there was a lack of evidence to draw any conclusion. But they did not say there was no such thing as UFOs. They said that there was no threat to national security, which I think that may be a lie, but in fact it wasn't a flat denial. And I imagine that wasn't a casual statement, that was very well thought out and crafted, that they said exactly what they wanted to say. So that appears to be the public policy as articulated by the Air Force. And that was high enough up the bureaucratic tree, and we've lived with that since that time. It would appear that our country has had a position. First of all, I am somewhat close to Rima in my personal belief. While I do not have any, I spent 30 years in the Navy as a naval pilot, and retired in '75. So it was during some of the hot years of UFO activity, reported activity, and never had a sighting myself. And so I'm just a student reader of what is in the published literature, and some that's not that people talk about. So I'm still looking from my first contact. There's been some suggestion with the people that I've dealt with over the years on this that I may have had my own experiences, but if so, I'm amnesic to them, and so what can one say about that? I either have or have not, but it's not at the conscious level if I have had any experience. As part of the treat process, we think it is a responsible undertaking to attempt.
What does TREAT
treat,
stand for?
Treatment and research of experienced anomalous trauma.
Treatment and...
It is an acronym coined by Dr. Laibow.
For the purpose, if I may interrupt you briefly, for the purpose of acting as a screening device. The first meeting, don't laugh, you passed the test, so you got to come. But just, the first meeting was among therapists, UFO investigators, and parapsychologists, and interested others, like special assistants to Claiborne Pell, who, although Scott has some established credentials in the parapsychology area that are very interesting, there are so many loose cannons and so many inflexible, rigid believer types out there that I really wanted to screen for them, screen against that. So I created the the phrase experienced anomalous trauma, and then I created the Center for Treatment and Research of Experienced Anomalous Trauma, which happens to spell TREAT, and only those people who recognized the acronym and enjoyed it got to, or were, attracted to it, got to get an invitation to the first meeting. And it worked. There was a lovely community of people who could really talk together flexibly and in a non-rigid way. And I decided that it was so useful. And since I'm a clinician, provides such an important framework for the central core of TREAT, of what we're doing, that the name has been retained.
Earlier, the question was, what are they up to? And I don't know. I don't think that anyone knows. I suspect that the agenda, assuming the reality of them, the agenda is quite complex, so that it could not easily be answered in one breath or in one evening. More than that, there has been such a diverse reporting of different descriptions of them that they may represent more than one group, as far as the universe is concerned. This can get into a broader thing. Let me just limit it down to I guess what I'm saying is I haven't the vaguest idea what their agenda is, although I marvel at at what is out there. And I guess I'm equally impressed with the certitude that many people have, that they know precisely why they are here. And this does get very quickly into the potential of public policy, because one of the scenarios that we hear, and there's documents circulated on this, is that there have been deals struck or treaties signed between some of the visiting others and the U.S. government and perhaps other governments. There appears to be no evidence for this, but it is one of the popular. Actually, it is a part of the explanation why the U.S. government won't come true. Won't tell the American public what's going on. They can't, because they have a treaty arrangement in which one of the treaty provisions is the U.S. government will not ever reveal that they allow the aliens to do whatever the aliens are doing. You can read that very easily, and any of you who've been in the field have read that, Now, if that in fact is true, and I guess I don't believe it is, personally, without any evidence that it is true, I don't give too much credence to that particular story. But if there is some understanding between the government of the United States and whomever these folks are, part of public policy, that is secret public policy, is to keep the U.S. Congress and the American public ignorant of this fact. And that would be a rather important decision at a high level.
And would the president be informed of this or not?
I would assume that all the presidents since 1947, whatever the government knows, each of the presidents have been briefed on that. I find it very difficult, although people will disagree on this, that the president could be excluded from this.
Well, what I've heard, not related to this or anything particular, is that there's a whole, I don't want to use the word bureaucracy, there's a whole administrative group who are, that's their careers, they've been doing it for years, and they know exactly what they're doing, or they think they do anyhow. But the president comes and goes, and therefore they consider that the president, because he comes and goes and they don't know where he's going, that they keep these things from the president.
Well, let me just theorize.
That's Bill Cooper's position.
As a political scientist, the thing I find not unattractive or unappealing, but unrealistic about this is that no matter how secret, and this group is usually identified as a very small group, but yet powerful. And so who are we talking about? How powerful? We're talking about senior admirals and generals, all of whom report to the commander-in-chief, who is the President of the United States. Are we talking about senior civil servants, all of whom are subordinate to the senior, By excluding the President, there is such a political vulnerability that when, and let's assume the existence of this small group who are the keepers of the flame of these secrets, that won't last forever. I mean, they will be either exposed or come out and make the announcement. If it is unknown to the president, it would be the death of them all politically and one thing or the other, to now suddenly say to the president, oh, by the way, Mr. President, for 40 odd years, neither you nor anyone else have known about us, and we've done the following things, and
We've
for
been
our own
running with
reasons,
you.
we've decided to tell you. Okay. Or if it is discovered, they are doomed, because no matter how powerful they are, the president has resources vastly superior to them. And so I would think from the political, realistic viewpoint that they would have to include the president. And moreover, I think the president would have to be included in order to be as successful as they apparently have in keeping the secret. You have to have the number one person if you're going to have such a high-level conspiracy.
But what about a president, for instance, who says, I don't believe in UFOs? That's a lot of nonsense.
Well, probably that would be all of them going in. Can you imagine what is in the briefing packet that a new president would get on this? The graphics, slides of tissue, an explanation by a pathologist, whomever would make up this team, presumably, are fairly well capable of bringing some very impressive evidence to a new president, along with a recommendation that whatever they want to do or whatever is going on, that he join and not change the policy.
But
What about
this president, at least, with his CIA background, must know certainly the CIA must know what's going on, wouldn't you think?
I don't know.
I can't imagine a group in this country successful enough to keep a secret from those guys.
What about Barry Goldwater's attempt to, this has been well publicized, this is printed up in various journals in the UFO literature. Barry Goldwater was
Repeated attempts to get into what they call the Blue Room. Yeah.
right, and one of his friends, a very highly placed general, said,
Curtis
"Don't ever
LeMay.
ask." Curtis LeMay asked, "Don't ever ask me that question again." And it just begs the question as to, well, where do you go from here, Barry? What do? Do you just stop there, or do you try to find out something more about what's going on?
Well, from the record that I've seen, apparently we share it, Clarence, Senator Goldwater did try rather persistently over not a small number of years for a personal interest, and because constituents from Arizona and outside, people have interest in the field, would keep pinging on him. My God, you're a U.S. Senator, very senior, you're a reserve Air Force general. Why can't you get, you ought to be able to find out, check into it. And I guess we've all seen, you and I at least have seen copies of the letters in response to that he went to the Chief of Staff of the Air Force. And he was told, not only no, but hell no, and don't bring it up again, Barry. You're not going to be allowed to get into the Blue Room, whatever the Blue Room is. It's a genuine. Obviously, it's an interesting mystery. Well, one of the things, then I'll get off of this, because I would like to find out something about you all also. One of the projects that we have underway is to see what different degree of sensitivity and openness that other countries have compared to the United States. Actually, I don't care to compare them. We just want to find out, are the Soviets willing to be more forthcoming? Are the Chinese, are the Brazilians, or others? And so we have had for several years now a very low-profile program going. Actually, I got it started in China in September of last year. I went over there primarily to meet with some parapsychologists, but I'd also asked for an opportunity to meet their people who are interested in UFOs. And so the day was set aside for this, and my the trip that I was on was for 2 weeks, and it was generously facilitated by the Chinese government. I had good contacts in the Chinese embassy in the United States, civilian and military, and I told them the people I wanted to meet, and then they facilitated that. And so they knew going over that I wanted to meet with the Chinese, Chinese UFO research organization. And they were a little shy about getting that appointment. It happened about the 10th day, and I kept pushing their buttons to set it up. But finally, a full professor at the Beijing University of Aeronautics and Astronautics hosted a meeting between the president, myself, the president, the vice president, general secretary, and deputy general secretary of the Chinese UFO research organization. And we spent all day together talking about UFOs in China, in the United States, in the world. It ended up with them responding rather generously to a request that I had. First of all, they talked quite openly of exchanging information between the Soviet Union and themselves. About one of them going to Vladivostok and coming back with some crash material that the Soviets gave them. And it was pretty clear that they had, assuming that these are true stories, at some level, an exchange program between an information between the Soviets. I said, that is wonderful. I would like in my country to be a part of it. And I think I did say, if it's not already. But if it is already part of it, it is at a level that is not, that the people that I deal with know nothing about it. At first they didn't believe this, and that took a while, it took several hours for them to realize that even though I at the time was in government and worked for a very senior senator, nobody in Congress, and certainly I didn't know anything about what the U.S. government was doing. When they believed that, then we operated at a little bit more open world way.
Do you think that the fact that the Soviets and the Chinese, maybe not Chinese so much at this point, but that we're not at war, or expecting a Cold War, does this make it easier to do that, or do you think that even when the countries have been politically at odds, that groups who have common interests like this, which transcend national, they have to do with the planet, not with a certain part of the political part of the planet, have they constantly been in contact with each other?
Edith, I don't know, but I can speculate. First of all, I spent half my Navy career in naval intelligence.
I know.
And
very impressive.
And I can say generally that for good and sufficient reasons, without giving you any details, there have been all sorts of contacts between countries who have been bitter enemies, while the public and the real policy were that we're at each other's throat. It's very practical to keep lines of information and communication and exchange open.
Medicine does that. In the whole medical community, Russia and the United States may have been at the Cold War, but when you get together, it's as if you've got something more important and more general than these politicians who are fighting.
There's an interesting statement that I will end up before I shut up on this point, and you provoked it, and it's interesting in what it was stating. But what the Chinese did at the end, after they talked about bringing back a Soviet sample and analyzing it and sharing, exchanging with the Soviets, I said, what could I do to be a part of this? And they had been talking about a recent series of sightings in China that was going on when I was there, and had given me a great deal of detail that had been reported to them, some press clippings and also reports that were coming from the field from their people. Their organization, as they described it, is quite significant. Some 40,000 members nationwide, and they alleged that 70% of them were professionals. They are trained. They have a training program for their people, and gave considerable details. As I'll be talking about this at the MUFON conference in July in Chicago, and that it was interesting. At first, they wanted to maintain that they were a social organization, and when they said that they were 40,000 inside, I said, well, that's a very large Tea Party. for you all to get together for a social get together, you know, and it was really quite amicable. But this was when we were still trying. They were still a little bit hurt that I was had not been honest, open with them. But they said finally that the sighting that had been going on for some 85 days in one of the central provinces had ended up in either a crash, a landing, or a crash. And they pulled out an envelope that had one web page in it, and he was reading from that to me in Chinese. And I said, well, gee, if it's a crash, what would be the chances of getting some of that crash material? What I had done, I made a pitch to them that if, at the non-governmental level, if we could establish and maintain an exchange program of information and material associated with this phenomenon, we would have a better chance of understanding what is real and what is not real and what it means. But that any one country trying it alone probably, or all countries trying to do it alone, probably your predictable failure. We're just never going to figure it out. And I don't think it's predictable what country and when will come up with a piece that makes a very scattered mosaic right now seem to be random. And so I think every country ought to be given a chance to play. And now in principle, they thought this was interesting, and then they dropped a few clues that in fact they're doing this with the Soviet Union. And I said, well, please let our country play at the non-governmental level. And I suggested to them, because I had thought about this, that there would be a minimum of protocol and rules, but two very essential ones is that only unclassified data will be handled. That they should not offer, nor should anyone take something that is officially classified, because that's just too dangerous for both the offerers and the takee. And that if information and material is exchanged, it will be with the understanding that it is made available to everybody else. It can't be for your eyes only, but what the United States gets from China can be shared with Brazil, South Africa, Israel, France, the Soviet Union, and so on. And they all agreed to that. They thought that was fine. And the very end of this is that after an interesting conversation in Chinese that was not translated by my translator, and I had learned at that point to be patient when that occurred, he reached in, got the envelope out again, and this time brought out a little folded piece of packet of paper and opened it up, and it was full of silver, aluminum, metal shavings, and said that their man in the field had collected, and it was translated as sawdust, when they were sawing up parts of the crash, and asked if I'd like to have some of that. And I said yes.
Thinking hard.
Yeah. I said yes, I would be very pleased to have that, and said if you're willing to share it, under the terms that we have just discussed, it will be the opening round of this. I said if you allow me to take this out, I will have it analyzed in the United States and send it back to you, and I also would share part of the sample with other countries. And they smiled and they said that was fine. And so we're in that process.
Has it been analyzed?
Yes, it's been analyzed, and I've shared it with the Chinese. It has also facilitated an exchange for reciprocal information and samples from the Soviet Union.
Bravo.
And that is being in turn shared back with the Chinese, and we hope to ring in other countries also. So it's underway. I don't know where this is going to go. Matter of fact, to be quite honest with you, I don't have high expectation that analysis of these reputed hunks of hardware from a UFO craft is going to be key to understanding what's going on. What I think is important in this sort of program is that people start sharing whatever else there is, and that it may have the potential of leveraging our country and other countries who have additional information or other information at the classified level to reassess that policy. And that I think is worthwhile. If, for example, in the United States, if the U.S. government does know something of significance, and I suspect it does, it appears not to have ever shared it with Congress, which I find just absolutely incredible. And so at least I hope they would reassess that and bring in some key people in Congress, or whatever it is, to spread that knowledge, spread that risk. Of course, I'd like them to share it with the U.S. public, but I would like to give them cause to believe that their old policy is perhaps going to come unraveled because of an open international effort that might make it embarrassing for them. I hope this doesn't come out as by gosh, we've got a club and we're going to beat them over the head, because I don't believe that would be successful. What I'm proposing to do is something reasonable on its own merits, almost as if there's nothing else going on, but strongly suspecting that there is something else going on, that this or a program like this would have some impact upon.
Excuse me, could I ask you two quick questions? I know you wanted to move on, but we don't get naval intelligence people that often, and up this neck of the woods. But I felt for years, for my own reasons, that the Navy's been the one that's dealt with UFOs. You want to comment on that at all? Or?
Yeah, I've heard that. I mean, that was. I will say that part of my duties in the Navy. I mean, first of all, the last thing I'm going to say, and so I'll say it first, is I looked hard when I was in the Navy for this, because I had a personal interest. I really wanted to find out. When I was flying off carriers, I kept looking for those suckers, never saw one. And so I said, okay, that just means I never saw one. But other people were reporting them, and I heard that there were crashes, and heard and read about the Roswell incident. So I said, where's the meat? I want to find it. And there was a time when I had every significant clearance the Navy had. And matter of fact, I ran a division in the Navy Scientific and Technical Intelligence Center. And it was the division that would have responsibility for that type of hardware. And so I reasoned that since I had 20 or more engineers working for me, if the Navy had anything to do with it, I was about to find out, alas. And I even made a larger effort than that. My counterpart had an Air Force and an Army counterpart. And the Air Force counterpart, of course, was stationed at Wright Pat Air Force Base. And we exchanged visits every 2 months. He would come and work in my vault, and I would come and work in his vault. And I waited for this propitious moment around noontime when everyone else... Now, the vault literally is that. It's a room inside of a room where the most precious secrets we keep locked up. And as a way of assuring that you can say anything in there, you never allow any external wires to go in it, never any telephone, anything like that inside the vault. And so we're in the vault, and we were working on some very difficult and genuine intelligence issues concerning the Soviets and their technology. And everyone drifted out, and we were about to go to lunch, and so I turned to him. And I said, we've never discussed UFOs. And so I made a statement, something like, I have this personal interest, and I've checked all the Navy black areas. I can't find anything about it. I said, what can you tell me? And his response was so genuine and so, immediate. And I've known this person for 2.5 years. He said, Scott, I've had the same question, and I've looked around here and I can't find a damn thing. Now, he was either lying to me or he wasn't. And I had no way of determining.
And then just one other quick question is, when I write to my congressmen, as I regularly do about the UFO phenomena, as well as senators and the president, I'm invariably referred to NASA. Why? I never get a personal response.
Yeah, I don't. Well, from what? From the senators? Or
any senator, any congressman?
Well, because they don't know anything about it.
Okay.
I mean, what? I mean, besides, that's typical anyhow. This is the typical response as a staffer. We did that. We make a guess. Who knows something about this? And I think in our office we would probably have referred you to the Air Force. And the Air Force would have sent you a little packet saying, Project Blue Book lasted from so-and-so to so-and-so and was closed down because there was no credible, that sort of thing. I don't know, what does NASA tell you?
NASA sends me a very polite letter saying that they don't understand my letter. But But no, I find it interesting because over the years I've had various responses, usually from the Air Force, but in the last 5 to 6 years it's always been NASA, and I always thought, and considering NASA has some of the most vocal critics of the UFO phenomenon, I find that innocuous.
Well, okay, are you familiar with the Zachariah Sitchin books?
Yeah, I know him personally. He's a very interesting man.
Okay, then you know I'm really having trouble shutting up, but you provoked this. Are you familiar with his book?
Please go
Zachariah
ahead. This is
Sitchin.
very interesting.
The Chronicles,
Yeah,
the Earth Chronicles.
and particularly
4 volumes.
Genesis Revisited, in which he gives in one of the latter chapters, I think it's the last chapter, he talks about and gives the full quotes from President Reagan's 3 speeches, and then from Gorbachev's speech on this subject. And this was after Gorbachev and the president had gotten together. Essentially, the core of what President Reagan said was that wouldn't we on Earth come together and forget our squabbles and our problems if we were threatened by someone outside? And he used the word alien, he used from another planet, and there were several different constructions, but the thesis was the same thing. Some of you may know that some of the UFO researchers found that so intriguing, they wrote to the White House and they asked who was responsible for drafting that speech for the president, assuming that it would be NASA or the Air Force or the Navy or something like that. The response they got back was that they had checked with the president's, with the speechwriter's office, and the speechwriter group said that this was the president's personal insertion.
That's right.
Now Gorbachev acknowledged that he had talked to the president about this, and essentially said that he wouldn't argue with what the president had to say, but as I recall, he thought that the immediacy of it or the timetable was a little different. And one wonders, because it's in the chapter and in the book of Genesis Revisited, whether the Soviet astronomers and the U.S. astronomers have a disagreement of when the 10th planet will really be back in, and that's what Gorby was saying. You guys, you've missed it by 150 years.
You got plenty of time.
It's not going to happen in my lifetime, and of course it's right. It won't happen in his lifetime.
But don't you think this has been something about human beings that history has demonstrated many times, that people who are disagreeing, when they have a common enemy, just the Gulf War has done that with us, and over again, there's no better way to get people to cohere than to have a common enemy. Now, if we could say that the human race on this planet has a common enemy, I wonder what would happen. I thought this is a very interesting idea you brought up.
Well, please don't give me credit for it. I'm appalled that the president would make that statement. First of all, I doubt that he has the data that they are the enemy. But if anyone wants to make, if there's anything easy to do in life, it's to make enemies. That really doesn't take much skill. and that's the message I got from Reagan, that he's making enemies out of them. Whatever for, if he's got something. If they deserve to be enemies, I'd like to know what it is,
Did you know that a letter exists from the Pentagon that was written in conjunction with that statement that Reagan made from one of the people at the Pentagon, actually one of the undersecretaries, one of the generals, saying that the president is keenly aware of the threat and is taking steps to reverse the situation? And a week after the letter was written and mailed and the person read it and called the Pentagon, the person was fired and disappeared, and that's true. Yeah, I such
Be
might
interested
like
to
to
see
know.
a copy of that letter.
Sure.
You have a copy?
Yeah, because a guy from Long Island wrote it, a friend of mine.
Oh, that's
And he's the one who disappeared?
No, the gentleman at the Pentagon, he was transferred. He was like, goodbye.
Well, I would like to amplify something that Scott just said. When Treat 1 was in process, that was May of 1989, just about a year ago, as a matter of fact. 2 years ago, exactly 2 years ago. You want to say what that is?
Well, let him compare it to his.
Yes, I thought that was very, very, very interesting. Do compare it.
What is that we're looking at?
We'll talk about it.
Okay.
The homogeneity of the metal in both cases is rather interesting. When Scott said one of the few things that he said publicly at that meeting, and I was impressed by the fact we did not know each other at that point had not worked together, had only spoken on the telephone several times. And I was impressed by the fact that I thought it was one of the dumbest things I'd ever heard anybody say. Scott...
She hasn't changed her mind much.
Well, as a matter of fact, that's the point of what I'm going to say. Scott, we were talking about what needed to be done and where our focus needed to go. It was the last day, and it was the final session, and it was a where do we go from here kind of discussion. And Scott said, and people were talking about aliens and enemies and evil genetic manipulation and so forth, and Scott said we ought to be asking what kind of poetry they have, what kinds of songs, what kind of music they have, and how they make love.
Do they eat strawberry ice cream?
And do they? He hadn't gotten up to dessert, and I thought, oh, I can't believe that someone reasonably sagacious, at least on the telephone, would say something that silly. Well, I've undergone a fairly major shift in my thinking about this, and that's true in many areas. But in one of the important areas is that ascribing, first of all, assuming they exist, ascribing a status of enmity and alienness to these beings without having documentation that that is accurate, and in fact creating a stance of enmity probably is the worst possible thing that we can do, both for ourselves and for our relations with these guys, if they in fact do exist. And I think, it's not unreasonable to think that it's within the realm of probability that they might very well. Even if they in fact are an enemy, if we turn together in a mode of turning against them, we will inevitably destroy ourselves. I think that's also true of human history. If we turn together in an effort to turn towards them, should they in fact exist, I think that rather than destroying ourselves, we offer ourselves the possibility of coming together in a major way of significance. And I think I have come to think much more in line with what Scott was saying. Whether or not they have poetry, whether or not they have the same value system we have, to band together in enmity is to eventually turn against one another after the immediate threat is lifted or when the squabbles begin. The revolution eats its children while turning together in fear also consumes the people who do so. And I think it's a major philosophical point that's worth noting.
Interesting thing. And I'm glad I'm not the only person that has a pointy piece of metal. I feel a lot better now to do another pointy piece of metal.
Okay, that metal, we really don't have a pedigree on it. We have been told what it is. It was given to us when we were, actually it was mailed to us after we had visited some scientists in Leningrad, one of whom has a very responsible position in the Soviet All-Union, what is it, this commission?
He is the program chairman for the next conference on anomalous phenomena from the All-Union Commission on Anomalous Phenomena, which is a unit of the Academy of Sciences. He's also Soviet Academy. He's also the senior scientist at Leningrad Technical Institute. Sergei Kuzyanov.
But Sergei, the first day we were there, in conversation, we were talking about crash, and whether or not the Soviets had, because I had been told previously by some friends in Moscow that, oh yes, they had crash material, and they'd done that sort of thing. And so we were, trying to put the squeeze on to share some reports, some information,
Anthology
some photos.
slides.
Could we visit the barn where you keep this stuff and the normal things, and they were, actually they were sweating about it because now these are friends of mine, and I'd worked with them for some years in the field of parapsychology, but now we'd opened it up and we were now in the area of UFOlogy. And I had told them that I wanted, simply, not the ground rules, but the understanding was that I am interested in what you can share, but only if it is openly shared, that it's not classified. And I really believe that they were struggling then, and still are struggling, of a way of getting it out of their system. so that they can safely give it to me, and that I can safely carry it out of the Soviet Union, and so that we can share it openly. I have some hopes that in fact we will get something significant from the Soviets, from Moscow. Well, meanwhile, quite an independent mind young scientist, when we were talking about this, sort of said, well, yes, we have crash material. And I said, well, I would be excited to see that. And he said, well, it's somewhere around the house. And Rima said, well, do you think you could find it? And he said,
Smiling prettily.
yeah, I think I'll look for it. And so he brought it in the next day, and it was a hunk about like this, of which that is a slice. He told us that it was from a crash and exploded to the UFO. He gave us the location and the date. And
He said this is from a
Yes.
UFO?
Yes.
and said he had a report about it that he would be willing to share with us. As a matter of fact, he brought that in, and that was a Sunday. And he said, okay, let's go get a copy of it. And he said, nowhere in Leningrad can you get a copy made on Sunday. And so we then waited impatiently for several months before we got the report and the material.
There was another piece. I thought you were going to talk about the
Go ahead.
Well, that was a wonderful piece. He was a very straight, earnest young man. And he said that he thought he could find it. And he had wanted to turn it into earrings for his wife.
Oh, no.
And Scott said later that he thought he was going to have to pry me off this young man's throat and do CPR on me. Because of the strong response, earrings? You turned this into earrings? We had a chunk of unknownium and you made it into earrings?
That's wonderful.
But it turned out that a psychic friend of his, Anya, told him that the aliens did not want this made into earrings. Anya was working for the scientific establishment of the aliens, and he refrained therefore because he values Anya's input. He did manage to find it and bring it the next day, and has in fact shared with us the preliminary report, and now we are... I gave him a fax because we thought that was he was here in March. I thought that was the easiest way to communicate directly. I gave him an international fax that would work on Soviet voltage and telephone lines and currency. And being an engineer, he just couldn't resist. I had a phone call with him yesterday that Scott doesn't know about yet. He couldn't resist, so he had it rewired. And he's been toying with it for several months.
He had it what?
Rewired. Because yes, it would work, but it was so much more interesting to make it really adapted to. So now the fax works and we can get the documents directly, but there's a package coming with the technical reports following the preliminary report on this sliver, which is where? Yes, which is there.
Can you tell us a little bit? I'm sorry, about the composition. Have you had it analyzed?
It's being analyzed now, the Soviet report. Now we have in the Soviet report that we got on this, there are only about a page and a half that directly address the sample. The rest of the 50-odd pages, I've had it translated, is a highly theoretical speculation by a rather respected scientist in the Soviet Union, but he has a theory on the energy field associated with UFOs, and he only incidentally or casually mentions the sample. Well, we have subsequently learned that there is a much more detailed report, and we're trying to
Which
get that.
presumably is on its way by Federal Express. Scott doesn't know about that either. It was a good phone call yesterday.
I'd be delighted by the way to manifest this one of mine, which I got in a lot less dramatic way, but maybe not more directly. But I wanted to ask you a question.
Well, let me first answer the rest of
What
that
magic?
question.
You disappear and you come down with all
All
these
this
things.
stuff.
This is
my
wonderful.
God.
Don't get up.
The page and a half to which Scott referred had some very interesting and highly suggestive information, which, if true, is going to be truly fascinating. But Soviet technology and instrumentation is not wonderful. They say that this sample is comprised of 8 elements. This one, unlike the Chinese alloy, does not fit into any known metallurgical formulation.
Are these 8 elements that we know about that occur on the planet
yes,
here?
principally copper.
And Edith, that is all we should ever expect. To have the analysis come out in terms of elements that we know about. Now that sounds like an unextraordinary or extraordinary statement, but think about it. How else? What else would we?
Well, we
only can
but
describe
so what
the
you're
known.
saying is that there could be something else in it, but we wouldn't have the
No,
means of
I'm not
knowing
saying
it by
that.
testing
I'm
it.
saying that we can only test for what we know.
Yeah, absolutely.
We might, what the interesting thing in this, if this elemental analysis is correct, and I must tell you that the elemental analysis that they did of the Chinese sample was incorrect. There were 3 elements. We have good reason to believe that we got quite accurate information about the Chinese sample, which was repeated in 2 separate laboratories that didn't know of each other's work, and so on and so on. There's no question that it was a known and standard alloy, or its standard alloy metallurgical formulation. There were a few anomalies, but nothing to get horribly excited about. If it's accurate, this sample that was just passed around is not a known functional alloy, and it has some weird properties, including, allegedly, and we don't know if this is true, we need to replicate this, allegedly, it's only 1/3 as dense as it should be. But then again, the Soviets don't know very much about powder metallurgy, and there may be air bubbles in this sample, and our scanning electron microscope will tell us that. Supposedly, chunks of this material, when cut apart, repel each other.
Repel each other?
Repel each other, which is not standard metallurgical.
Then they must have
behavior.
magnetic properties.
Yeah.
But we don't know whether that's true.
Well,
They
they-
say
Does it have a
that-
magnetic property to some other metal? That's the question.
Oh, by the way, can I pass this around and have you put your names and addresses down so I can add you to the mailing list and we can be in contact?
Great.
Can I ask you,
Just here.
Can you?
do you have
On the 11th of
access to,
January.
No, just
do you
start
have
right.
access to translators to translate Russian?
Yeah, I have friends.
Because if you're interested, I've got like 20 files in Russian if you want them. I just got them, so they're brand new. Or you may already have enough stuff of your own to...
I can help you with those too.
Yeah? Okay, because I've got like... They sent me, I wrote to them 2 years ago, right? Could you send me a few things? They sent me 100 files in Russian. I mean, they're very cooperative.
Who's the they?
Vladimir Lebedev in Moscow Physical Society. They're very cooperative. They're really tremendous people. At least I find them that way anyway.
Do you have the titles of the material then? Do you know what you have?
I don't speak Russian. I don't read or write Russian, but I know that what I've gotten from them in the past has ranged from newspaper articles to internal memos to just investigative reports by volunteer investigators, that work with Russian UFO organizations. All kinds of goodies. I think a lot of it's correlated together. It's been very interesting. In fact, I had applied to the Fund for UFO Research, but they're too busy giving Bud Hopkins money to hypnotize people.
Yeah.
They don't have any money for my translation, so. But anyway, I really feel that there might be some good stuff in there. In fact, I think one is about a Russian UFO crash of recent vintage, because he did mention that. He writes English, but it's broken English. It's not the best, but he did mention that, and I'd love to find out. This one also has some newspaper articles with photos, which are very interesting as well.
I have somebody here in Westchester, Dimmy, who's been providing who's been providing some services for us, and I could have him scan the ones that you think are interesting to see whether there's anything
Sure.
worth going forward with.
Okay.
Translation can be fairly expensive.
I know. I had a person living right near me that did it, and he moved, so.
I know a girl that could do a great job for you with that. She worked for me and is now here in Westchester. She's
Really?
in Bedford or somewhere. And in fact, I'm going to see her tomorrow.
Okay. Sounds good to me. If you could ask, because
Address, I'll put you on to her.
I'll give it to you, definitely, before I leave, because I've got all the stuff sitting around, and it's really tragic, because
She can do it for you in either English or German. Or both.
Wow. This is
It's
good.
terrific.
I always run into that problem, it's too expensive to be afforded. I spend, too much now in UFOs, it'd be pretty ridiculous to pay for the
Kind
translation.
of an abstract question. Maybe it's abstract, but it's kind of interesting. It goes back to
Yeah,
this whole idea of the government trying to make enemies of these people. or not. And the Bushmen who are just intrinsically friendly and don't know how not to be friendly or inhospitable. And so with them, their relationship to these star people is a problem because they come from the star. It's very simple. They give them giraffe meat, which is a big delicacy, and they give them little presents. And it's an absolutely relaxed sort of thing. I mean, they're as casual as somebody drops in from next door and is or is not introduced, depending on where the conversation is going.
It's delicious, too.
And my question is, and I think the idea is starting, I used to work with dolphins a lot, and in that connection we got around J.Z. Knight and Kenny Torrance who were channeling Rafu and Romford between them about $40 million a year worth of either hoax or not, depending on how you feel about it. But the interesting thing was that these two girls had created, obviously were channeling something, and had created, both having been raped in their homes, had created these guys with swords, and they were both 8 feet tall and could kill anything. And, I mean, they sort of never seemed to channel a little old lady with a limp, for instance. But my question is, if these entities or beings, people, or whatever they are, have perhaps an extra-dimensional quality instead of an extraterrestrial quality.
What did you say? An extra
Dimensional.
Extra-dimensional. Then, in other words, if they possibly have access to another dimension, which clearly exists in places like the pyramid, and anybody who's been in that pyramid knows that it's a reality, it's a physical reality. There's a way of getting into another dimension that we can't describe because we don't have words for it. Something happens to you in there, you come out, you don't know what it is, but you know it's happened. I was just there 2 weeks ago. And the question is it possible, perhaps, that the way we meet these people is the way, in fact, that it's our perspective that dictates whether they're friendly or not. And if a guy is aggressive and hostile and insecure because the guy's got a weapon that he can't handle, sees him as an enemy.
Well, it's a really, really important question, and I want to answer it at 3 levels, and then you can take it as you like. First of all, at the factual, does it make a difference what sort of story you're looking for level? A couple of studies have been done. Now remember, we're in an embryonic primitive point in all of this, and everything that's been done is preliminary or worse. Studies have been done looking at correlations between the personality of the hypnotist and the stories that the hypnotist evokes in regression hypnosis with UFO episodes, and B, the personality styles, factors, and dissociative styles of the people who tell the UFO scenarios, and looking for correlations there. In both cases, nothing has turned up so far. In fact, this is a little tidbit from Treat 3. Doug Richards, who's the director of research at Atlantic University, found that dissociation tendencies were likely to be 1/4 as prominent in UFO scenario tellers as in channelers, as in folks having other kinds of paranormal experiences. I just think that's interesting. Anyway,
Repeat that again.
people who tell UFO scenarios are 1/4 as prone to dissociation as people who channel, for instance, or as people who have out-of-body experiences. They tend to, the folks who have that kind of paranormal loosening tend to have very similar dissociative patterns. UFO folks tend to be substantially less likely to use dissociation as a technique.
In the same way that people who can, in religious contexts, get themselves to a state where they can disassociate and go into trance in that sense as well, because they are living within the myth as opposed to being outside and observing.
The UFO people don't seem to be immersed in the myth as a group, which is interesting. or if they are, they don't do it through dissociation. But anyway, there have been some preliminary studies about what determines what kind of story you get, what kind of story you recall or put out. And so far, we don't see very much correlation. I see, on an anecdotal basis, quite a lot of interesting stuff about the confabulation. That serves psychodynamic needs very, very nicely, but that does peel away in a reliable and predictable way. So that's one level of answer to the question. The second level of answer to the question is that there are cultures in which you don't have to go into a state of traumatic distress having had these experiences, because they're predicted, they're expected, and they're, in fact, in some ways encouraged. They're supported by the folklore and the myth system and so on. So the sociocultural aspect of the distress is going to be reduced, and therefore the confabulatory elements may be different. But the most significant answer, and the least clear one for me, is that, and this is something that, as I said, as I indicated, when 2 years ago when Scott was making his comment about what we needed to do, I was totally unsympathetic to this notion, so this has been a personal evolution for me. Whatever the impact on the individuals might be, whether they experience hostility or whatever, probably has more to do with our end of it than with the data as it seems to lay out. Let me give you a parenthetical insertion here. The index patient who brought me this UFO stuff to begin with, and who's gone on to have more and more and more and more experiences, and they go back early in her life, and she's got all kinds of anomalous scarring and this and that and the other thing. She is a physician, and she's a very, very good observer. She noticed that one particular creature wearing a black suit with what seemed to be static, silver-like discharges, silverish discharges across, appeared, and when this creature appeared, she felt absolutely overwhelming, disorganizing animal terror. But the creature didn't do anything. The creature didn't do anything to warrant such terror. And she observed, she'd seen it several times, and she observed that when this creature moved away from her, the terror decreased markedly and seemed to follow the inverse square law. And when it came closer, the terror increased and again seemed to follow the inverse square law in terms of intensity. And she reasoned that this was a neurological overflow or side effect of whatever the static represented, whatever kind of field the creature was emitting or involved in or somehow participating in. Now, when you think about, and this is an unusually good observer, so we have an unusual piece of information, but if you think about the projection into these creatures about meaning and intent and motivation, perhaps a lot of what's going on has to do with our expectation of what feeling this way, and it might be neurological overflow from the situation, from being lifted up, from having a gravitational field messed up, from God knows what, then kind of projected onto the exterior world and objectified when we don't have any data about what their intent really is. We have a lot of data about the fact that their intent seems to, or their involvement with us seems to indicate that they don't really have a good grasp of emotions in the way that we do. And they really are quite purposeful and seem to do whatever they're doing in a rather clinical, detached way, if they're there, of course. So it may be that these things are biologically engineered robots. A lot of people have suggested that.
Rima, that's one thing that's always interested me in all these stories. That these people don't act as if they're emotionally guided
Competent.
or emotionally stimulated. Or
But on the other hand, there are interactions reported with creatures that are generally taller and look somewhat different that do have emotionality attached to them. And I think if we prejudge what we're looking at and what their intent is by the experience that that interaction generates in us, we're in a big problem. And I want to say one other thing, and that is that information has been wafting around. A possibility has been suggested of a mode of communication which I think is so interesting that I'm putting together the experiment, and in fact have dragged Scott into the experiment. Not dragged, Scott is I presume you are a willing participant. You are He's at least a participant, in which I think it's possible to use the capacity for human group mind development through such devices as alpha training and shared biofeedback, which I just spent last week doing, to create a harmonious, deeply harmonious relationship between human beings. Offer that to dolphins in the course of developing a group mind with the dolphins, and then if the model is right, well, first of all, that's going to be very interesting, and that's going to yield a tremendous amount of information, and if anybody has a boat that they'd like to make available to us, we are
I know some
very...
people that would cooperate with you at Dolphin Research Center.
Excellent.
The Enneagram and all that, people who do the Enneagrams.
The dates are, as a matter of fact, set. June 8th through June 16th will be the first of these dolphin swims. And then, if the model is correct, the information suggests that it will be likely to create an energy device in this group mind beyond species, which would make the signal audible to a group of extraterrestrials who don't look like the little guys, who are perhaps hierarchical to them in some way. Now, even if that part of the model does not come to be, it's worth doing, I think, because of what we're going to learn about human consciousness, because the underlying, I mentioned that there's been a change for me, part of the underlying reality that's become clear for me, and this is a personal thing, this is not truth, this is my personal experience, is that whether or not it has anything to do with the alien agenda, assuming the aliens exist, what becomes possible is a kind of maturation of human consciousness. You spoke about interdimensionality. In the course of developing this kind of global consciousness or group mind, human consciousness changes. If it is possible to connect with the aliens in this way, there are several consequences of doing that. One of which is they seem to live in a domain that's different from ours and sometimes connect with ours and sometimes don't. But if the domains are connected by this energy device, then part of the model suggests, and this is all highly hypothetical, that it would be like opening a window between that domain and ours, and the light, as opposed to light and darkness, dynamic tension, entropy, anti-entropic forces that we live with, and that may destroy us, the darkness of that duality. Our light may well flood into their domain, and their light may flood into ours, changing in essence the kinetic energy and the potential energy of the system, and giving us perhaps more options for dealing with the planetary problems that we have that will
Well,
kill us
there's a guy in
otherwise.
California, in Santa Monica, who got financed by Josh Reynolds, who's one of the definitely edgy guys in our society in terms of near the cliffs. And he's built a screen that's about 3 feet long and 2 feet high, that's filled with liquid quartz crystals, which he says he energizes with 600,000 volts. I don't know what he runs in there, but there's a hell of a hum from outside this plant when they fire it up. And I went into an experiment there once where he said, just visualize, look at the screen and visualize, and when the electricity comes on and all these quartz crystals are going, you can in fact create, if you see a spiral, you see a spiral, and if you see little cubes, you see little cubes. It's extraordinary. And at some point during the thing, before I passed out, and I did pass out for like an hour, and
Really?
Not very strange, but
Fried your brains.
but at some point, stuff came flying out of that window, in the finest traditions of a Hollywood thriller, when the ghosties come out through the window. I mean, there was this cotton-like sort of stuff flying out of the screen. I mean, I was ducking. I was thinking, Jesus, what, and then I stopped.
Did you catch any?
No, I got very unable to reason finally or move or anything, that passed out. The whole thing happened over 45 minutes. They're working with this thing now. This was like in December that this happened. But they really think that they have created
An interdimensional window?
a gizmo that's potentially an interdimensional window. I can't tell you. I just tell you exactly what I saw. But certainly it was strange, and certainly you could look at that thing and see a spiral, and a spiral would form, and you could in fact authorize it to do things. I mean, I got so fascinated with it at one point before all the stuff started to come.
Boris, I would say, you brought up the dimensional concept of this. I suspect that a number in the room are familiar with Jacques Vallée and some others who have written about what I think is a very viable hypothesis of beginning to explain what is going on. Whether the entities that we associate with UFOs are from the visual universe or from an invisible universe. That is, they are from another dimension rather than from the Pleiades or something like that. And I think either option, either hypothesis, I think is just as attractive as the other. In fact, and of course one doesn't exclude the other either. And so that's just a comment that I have about the dimensional concept.
Well, there's a child in Santa Cruz whose name is Adragon de Mello, I think I got that right, who was in the tabloids about a year ago. He's the son of a friend of somebody that I knew years ago, and he's got some IQ that's off the scale. Hertok is Memphis kid, and he was trying to get into Stanford at age 11 or whatever it was, and he was busily designing a computer when I was there with its own language. And I took Jim Hertok, our friend, to see him, and he told Hertok that he had been told what language to teach this computer by his friends. When he completed this computer, which presumably, now I'm not a computer person, responded in a language all its own to this child genius, they set about building a fourth computer, which this child said was going to be an empathic computer, and he was being taught how to build it. And the computer would respond to his moods and his psychological changes. And he refers fairly obliquely to his friends who tell him how to do this. But the kid beats his father, who's a chess master at chess from the age of 4, and, is that kind of wonderful child.
Yes, Boris, some of the things that you've been touching on have a direct correlation to a lot of the material I've come across since I've been a member of the United States Psychotronics Association. This is an organization that has been in existence since the beginning of the 80s. I didn't join until 1985.
Look, remember, he's been the president for
Stop. Wait. That's the New York City chapter. But the original name of the organization was the United States Radionics Society. And radionics was something I just could not believe in. There's no way that a board with knobs on it and then no wires connecting it could bring about or create the phenomena that people who operated these radionic devices said that they could, through a series of rub plate and turning these knobs, they could influence things at a distance.
These people in Oxford.
Right.
Yeah, I visited them. Mm-hmm.
Well, since then, they changed the name before I joined the organization, the United States Psychotronics Association, and it seemed that many of the people on the board of directors were people who worked for a lot of the companies that did special work for the government, and whether it was the CIA or NSA or whoever. And a lot of these people had interest in UFOs. And and a lot of these men, although they were could not directly produce any of the things that they had created for the government, such as devices that actually could influence a person's consciousness, like mind control at a distance using electromagnetic technology. They made other devices which were quote-unquote like healing devices. For example, this is a Tesla watch. You're familiar with the Tesla watch? Okay. You have one of the early ones.
You mean from Andrea?
This is Andrea.
Andrea can't wear it.
Right. This is one. This one is
This
from
is one of
Alf
Andrea's
Cocoon,
watches?
based on Andrea's principles. Yeah. Coverups.
What is it all about? I do not know anything.
Well, it's supposed to send out a field of energy or cocoon that protects the individual from a certain extremely low frequency radiation that it could be very harmful or cause depression or some other state of consciousness. But that's all prelude to the fact that now that I've become more familiar with this field and started reading it, the area takes in issues of healing, parapsychology, UFOs, hundreds of other areas of interest that really many of the people who are here tonight are interested in. About 2.5 years ago, I gave a conference in New York called Cosmogate, in which I had a number of people from some of these areas lecture on why is the government hiding all of this information, and how can we go about getting or having a breakthrough in this regard. Now, it hasn't really happened quite the way I thought it would, but actually, I've begun to see that there has been an increase in the number of people who are developing devices, and I would think it's random because of it's spread across the country, but there are lots of people doing similar kinds of things that this young man that you saw one fellow with a screen, another one developing an incredible computer that's empathic, and other people who are developing other kinds of devices, numerous, too numerous to even get into. But a lot of these devices are out there, and that's another area that I think that people should be aware of.
You are absolutely right. 3 weeks ago, I was down in Lakemont, Georgia, with Peter Kelly and Bill Batar.
The Batar.
What?
The Batar?
The Batar. For those of you who don't know what Batar is, Batar stands for. Just happened to have with me my file on Batar, and I have my data from the Batar ride, which was phenomenal, absolutely phenomenal. Batar seems to stand for it's bioenergy. Well, I will pass it around. Anyway, it's a phase conjugation or time reversed signal device using scalar waves, which takes the I don't know what that means. I just repeat it. It's a magical thing, but I have no idea what that
Sounds
means.
nice to me.
It does remarkable things. It takes the energy field of the body from 4 to 16 hertz and feeds back altered waveforms based on the sampling of what the body's response to, or the energy field's response to music that's put into the environment.
When it puts it to
Turns out to
16
be.
hertz, what happens?
Well,
I
one
would
of the
think it would
things...
be bad for the body to have something so unnatural happen.
Well, one puts out, apparently, according to Peter, one puts out an energy field from 4 to 16 hertz on an ordinary basis. We're not talking about EEG. because there were no couples to the body. It was simply lying on the table with a series of transducers beneath one that were picking up and responding to and putting back in the waveforms. A number of things happened. There were strong psychic kinds of events, including precognitive ones for me. There was, I wouldn't say I passed out, I would say I entered samadhi, because it's the same thing that happens when I meditate, and I have some very interesting printouts of the data during those episodes where that basically I just blew out the scale on the energy measurement. And according to Peter, I can't tell you that this was true because I was out in the void. But according to Peter, I levitated 4 times, which I take to be an indication of either Peter's lack of honesty, which I haven't seen to be the case so far, or the fact that there is an incredible interaction with matter in its ordinary state when these fields are generated and stimulated in a particular way. That's one little piece of it. I mean, that's my introduction to psychotronics, and I said, I had previously been rather closed-minded about this, and I said basically, oh, I get it, there's something really important here. But as I began to rapidly pursue this area, I realized just exactly what you're saying, that there are major links between the areas that we're talking about. One of the things that we never got to this evening is that as the UFO portion of TREAT unfolded, I began to see that we had to deal with parapsychology. And I remember, I don't know if Scott remembers, but there was a memorable day. Scott is the president of the American Society for Psychical Research, newly re-elected today. If I have to
Congratulations.
They never learn.
And I was very close-minded about parapsychology. I mean, I was willing to deal with this UFO stuff, but not the parapsychology. I thought that was weird. And I realized that virtually everybody who was telling UFO stories had parapsychological lives that dated from their UFO experience. And I was also seeing parapsychological trauma people and non-trauma people, and they, when they trusted me, would confide that they had had UFO experiences which either began or greatly amplified their parapsychological lives. And Scott's experience, quite independent of mine, replicated that with the people that he's worked with. So I called up Scott one day and I said, look, Scott, it's clear to me that if we're going to deal with the UFO stuff and really understand it, we're going to have to deal with this parapsychology shit. And Scott very kindly was silent for a moment and gently said, yes, that is correct.
You bring that issue of the parapsychological factor as part of the ongoing need for your organization to move forward. Andrea Puharich, who you must have met or know, has on more than one occasion stated that the government, the United States government, and all governments, major governments, have used psychics for various and sundry reasons. I would find it of some interest to know if you, Scott, have ever discovered whether or not our government admits to using psychics.
Well, that's an easy one to answer. They don't admit to it, but it doesn't establish whether they have or not, the way you pose the question.
Oh, that's true.
I have I don't want to put words in your mouth, but in fact there is a significant part of the government. There is without the answer, there is a part of the government that deals with psychics all the time, and that is the Secret Service. They're not very happy about it, but they do, in fact.
Like policemen.
Yeah.
The elected policemen.
They're constantly being, they would consider it harassed and harangued, people walking in, calling in, writing in, and I happen to know this because I've worked with the Secret Service on these issues when I got out of the government after I retired from the Navy, and I taught for a while, and I got back to Washington, so guided back here. and for a few years to try to get the government interested in what I call applied psychic phenomena, and that is to market it. The only folks that showed any interest, the folks who showed the most interest was the intelligence community. But what they were willing to spend with me was peanuts, you know. I think what they wanted to do was to find out, you know, if I had the people that I was working with, they had any skills. And when they found that out, then I was sort of out of the loop at that point. No need to deal with me. But in fact, the government has dealt with psychics. I have talked about this publicly. I think the record probably, if we could get it all out there, would show a series of small, unauthorized, I'm just interested and I've had some discretionary money to spend, managers trying something psychic with a result that either is a null, so they shrug and somebody says, I told you that damn stuff wouldn't work. So that's the end of it. Or it is successful and gets noticed, and someone senior to them says, Clarence, if you ever do that again, you'll never make GS-14. Yeah. And so that collapses. And there's probably not any written record of this. You know, as a taxpayer and talking theoretically about these things that may happen, I am upset, because that's certainly not the way to learn, you know, or to advance yourself, is trying things in secret, and whether they work or don't work. That's data that we need to consider and do something about. So I sort of envisioned these little blips going on for the last 30 or 40 years, and we really never learned much from it.
My second question then is, how did Clayton Powell get interested in the stuff that you're interested in?
Well, he's the Renaissance person. I mean, he just really has broad interest. And as a matter of fact, he heard about me because of some work that I did, one of the small contracts that I had with the government. I mean, there's not that many nuts in Washington who have an interest in this, and it's so we get to know each other. And he heard about me, and he called me up and said he'd heard about me and what I had recently done, and would like to meet me. So we met, became personal friends for several years. And it was another thing that I was doing, this time not for the intelligence community. And excuse my vagueness, but the understanding is I really won't talk specifically about this. Anyhow, what I did for them was help them in some way in solving a very difficult problem. And they were appreciative enough, and this was pro bono from the company I was working with, to say, gee, you know, this is great, what can we help? Or what can we do for you? And I said, well, I've been in and out of your offices for a number of weeks here, and I know, because what you've told me, I know how you interact with people who claim to be psychics or psychic information, and I think I can come up with something that would assist you. And so I came up with a plan, and it was a good one, a good proposal, because it could be done, and it was inexpensive. And they were tempted to do it, but when they had it passed by 3 of their behavioral psychologist consultants, it was the end of the world, and their negative recommendations so terrorized them that they said, no, we can't do this. And I told them, I said, well, you know, I'm disappointed that you were responding this way, but in fact, it's the correct decision for you, because if you go in this with the fear of being caught by Proxmire was still giving the golden fleece at that time. He was in the Senate. And they said, quite frankly, this is what we're concerned about, you know, that Proxmire will hear about this, or that Jack Anderson will hear it and will get written up. And I said, well, don't do it then, because you're very likely to fulfill that fear. But I was still upset because it was so reasonable and potentially cost-effective thing that I wanted to do, that I wrote Pell a little note. And he knew what I was doing anyhow, and I told him, I said, what we need to do is to find someone inside government, like a senior senator, who has an interest in this field and see what we can do networking with some